Welcome back. So today we're going to do a quick one on the CKLVX CK-41. So this one's a bit of a head scratcher for me. I'm not entirely sure. My gut says that my CK-41 is not quite the same as other people's CK-41. If you think the CK-41 is the same as some other set that Meyer actually puts together for a different brand, I'm not sure. My gut says what I got is not quite the same as these other things, and maybe it's the same shell, maybe it's the same actually tuning and that they're hitting, but the drivers are probably slightly different. There's something different about this that mine doesn't really sound as well as I think other people's do, and maybe it's because I'm picky on stage, maybe I'm picky on balance and air and some other things that people aren't picky on, but yeah, this one is kind of a bit off for me. So we'll start there. So what is it? It's a 1+4 hybrid, tuned in a way that will be appealing to those people upgrading from sub $100 sets. If you have a bassier, above neutral, mid-bass boosted Harman 1DD, I think this one kind of hits that mark. It's kind of a bassy 1+4 is how I would describe it. And we'll kind of start with some nitpicks. And I think right out of the box, I really had the immediate urge to EQ it. It's not obvious why the stage is really small and the mids are so forward, but there's really no height to it and there's no width to it. Really flat. And when you look at the graph, you're kind of wondering how did that, because the graph looks pretty good. And I'm not sure what was going on, but it's really kind of immediately in ear. I'm like, this thing is okay, probably fixable, but there's just something off in the tuning that's being reflected right in the stage. And I've kind of talked about this a lot, where the stage isn't quite right. It tends to point to tuning problems, and that's kind of what exactly is what you're hearing here. So the DD is kind of an okay thing. It tended to bother me the more I listened to it. They really just left too much meat on the bones for this driver quality. Too much boom to it, too much bloat to it, and they push the mids forward to compensate for all of that. So you get this muddiness on the low end, and then they push the mids in front of it so it doesn't sound as bad, and the two combined ended up really messing with the stage. So, if you like your mids forward, this is pretty good, but it doesn't really resemble more expensive or more balanced tuning. This is kind of a reactionary. We've got this thing here that's doing this to the mids, so push them forward so they make them sound some better. But they, the side effect of all that is they kind of hose the upper treble. So the extra sub bass and mids are masking the upper treble. There's not a whole lot of air coming through. It's really, really hard to hear. And again, not too many people are really into listening forward and hearing the extension. You could look at the graph and say, yeah, it's perfectly extended. But yeah, I will admit that on the graph it actually looks pretty good. But in your ear, when you actually listen to music, you can kind of hear how the air doesn't come through because the sub bass is blocking it and the emphasis on the upper mids is blocking it as well. It's very rare on this set to actually hear end to end because there's just too many things in the way and they're off balance and hitting your ear at different levels. It's kind of a unbalanced tuning, I guess is how I would say it. So the mids are pushed in front of the bass, and that's kind of flattening the stage. It doesn't volume scale for that reason, and it sounds peakier than it is for the same reason. So I think at lower volume it sounds okay, but as soon as you tilt the volume up a little bit, you tend to sound it sounds peaky. And again, you look at the graph and you're like, why does it sound peaky? And then you realize that the mids and the vocals are really forward. And if you listen to other sets, other 1+4s or other hybrid sets, I happen to receive Cadenza 4. I had Hype 2. Hype 2 actually pulls off more bass than CK-41, but it doesn't really thrash on the mids. It actually very well done. And again, they didn't push the mids so far forward that they're in your face. Hype 2 was done really well. Cadenza 4, same way. They actually did it with less bass, but same idea. If you have less bass, you don't need to push your mids forward. Have them in line so you can hear end to end, and everything kind of works out well as it should. Two sets that are very similar in tuning to this one, but way more balanced, and the whole thing as a whole sounds, more like an expensive set as opposed to this one, which is really kind of influenced from problems that you find at lower budget sets. So, but if you actually EQ it, get rid of just a little bit of bass, push the mids back a little bit. I think you understand what they did. You could poke it in place, and it sounds like a nice 1+4. I wouldn't say it sounds more than the price. I think they kind of hit that pretty well, but kind of getting to that point, understanding why it sounds different than other hybrids. I think once you wrap your head around that, you can kind of figure out how to address it and fix it. But yeah, the bass, it's really the part that doesn't really pass at more than the price that they charge. You're buying a 1+4 for a reason, because it's going to be a dynamic driver with some more technicalities. You get 4 BAs, and those should sound quite nice and give you that, technical capability, more resolution, sharper transitions, all those things that should actually come through. Then they threw a dynamic driver on it that's actually covering up a lot of that. So I wouldn't even say change the tuning. I think, as I said, Hype 4 or Hype 2 actually hit more bass than this one does, and I think they could have done it, but man, it's just a really small change to that dynamic driver, so it's not as present, so it's not as muddy, it's not as boomy and bloated, and just knock it back so you can actually hear the mids come through, and then don't push them forward, and everything kind of comes out in balance. And as I said, the mids are sort of the annoying part, because they actually did a pretty nice job on tuning the balanced armatures, only to be offset by the level because of the dynamic driver. So at lower volume, you kind of hear it in a finer way because there's not as much boom to it or bloat to it, but it didn't really scale up as nicely as an actual nicely tuned hybrid. Without EQ, it's mostly, blast the mids in your face, so you turn the volume down, and that's kind of how this one works. So as a 1+4 hybrid, I think it's pretty much right for the price. This price point, there's lots of sets in the 1 to 200, 1 to 300s that aren't all that good. They tend to all have problems. It's really hard to execute a very, very nice hybrid in this price range. And this is sort of an example of what really happens. And so I'm not going to harp too much on it for that reason, because there's lots of other sets, lots of other hybrids, same price range, that all have different problems. And this one just tends to have a different set of problems. But Treble, again, the bass and the upper mids really get in the way of hearing it evenly. But again, it's actually done pretty well once you push those two things out of, stop masking it. It's really strange the way it works out of the box. That really heavy lower treble emphasis, really, really hard to hear the extensions and sounds airy. And I graphed it kind of over and over again. I'm like, it didn't make any sense. And then when you start picking apart the pieces along the way and why you can't actually hear the air, it kind of makes more sense. But once you hear it, I think they chose some pretty nice drivers, and they didn't pull them back or roll them off early. I think the graph, getting it to sound like the graph, I think is actually a pretty good thing, and it actually sounds pretty good. But yeah, out of the box, it's just kind of a little bit off balance. And again, the stage is the same way. Mostly way off balance for stage, kind of right out of the box. But clean up the tuning and the stage pops out, and you get height and width and depth, and all these things kind of magically appear, whereas you turn off EQ and the whole thing shrinks right into the middle inside of your head, and the vocals come right in your face, and you kind of just hear all the things that are slightly off balance, what it is off, out of the box, but not all that hard to fix it in EQ. So that is what I got on CK-41. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.